So thanks everyone for coming to this panel. Today's topic is on nuclear energy and oceans and rivers. And we have three pretty esteemed nuclear experts with us today who will introduce themselves briefly. But I just wanted to, open the panel by talking about why this issue is so important, not only actually from a technical or engineering perspective, but in some ways more important from also a public perception and advocacy perception as well. Because right now, as we all know here at COP, we're moving into a warming planet. And one of the things that's going to be happening is in many areas, it'll be a drier planet as well. But also the river water temperature and ocean water temperatures will also rise. And nuclear power plants, at least classically, use a lot of circulating water to help cool them down, especially, on the condenser side of things. I want to sort of open this forum up with a very basic question. Nuclear energy is both vital for decarbonization and also vital for many areas, like here in the United Arab Emirates, to actually solve water scarcity itself. Yet many people in their perception of nuclear energy view nuclear energy as a big consumer of water. So I want us to just sort of talk about that sort of dialectic that we're having, both nuclear energy as a solution to water scarcity in a warming planet, but also the perception that nuclear energy itself might suffer from those very same phenomena.
Hey everyone, I'm Luca Romano from Italy. I have a master degree in theoretical physics. I actually graduated on a different subject, quantum information theory, but then my interest shifted. And right now I manage nuclear advocacy and education project that I established, which is currently the largest in the world by number of followers. And I try to educate myself and my followers on all the issues concerning nuclear, which include, of course, the impact on the water reservoirs and on the sea, which is particularly important in Italy because we are a country that's surrounded by sea, that still suffered from droughts in the past years, as 2022 especially. And so people are deeply concerned about the potential impact on nuclear on water in general.
So, I think one of the really interesting questions as we start expanding nuclear energy is, the ability for nuclear energy to be deployed in water scarce regions, especially landlocked water scarce regions. And following up on her comments, Luca, I'm wondering, given that Italy is surrounded by sea, as you noted, and, when we're talking about the water use in a nuclear power plant, most of it's not consumed, especially in a, sea cycle, or what we call an open cycle plant, where we just take the water into the condenser, put it back out. And given that you use seawater for that, and there's a lot of seawater, of course, in the Mediterranean and the surrounding water bodies, how is the public perception of water use in Italy and nuclear energy playing into the overall debate about whether we should redeploy nuclear energy back into Italy?
Well, first of all, people are mostly concerned about the impact on tourism because, yes, Italy is surrounded by water, but most of Italy's coastline is inhabited and is actually touristic spots. So people are concerned that it will possibly impact the tourism sector. Now, of course, it's misplaced concern, first of all, because the footprint of a nuclear plant is quite tiny, so you can find like a few square kilometers in the whole coastline of Italy. And secondly, because there are indeed spots which are not inhabited and are actually industrialized. We have Porto Tolle, which is an area in the northeast of Italy, which is there is a coastline that is heavily industrialized, right, and where wastewaters are usually dumped into the sea. I have to say that mostly the environmental agency prevent like the water to be too polluted, but yeah, you could place a nuclear power plant there very easily. Actually there is a very big gas-fired power plants, combined cycle, so it uses water. So yes, people are mostly afraid of that, and they're also afraid of the impact on biodiversity. So they're afraid that the nuclear wastewater might contaminate the area or impact wildlife in any way. Now, of course, we know that water coming out from a cooling system of a nuclear power plant are not contaminated, they're not dangerous, but they're slightly warmer. So there is, of course, the waste heat from a nuclear power plant does not affect the Earth as a whole. It's like a tiny fraction of the extra heat that we trap with CO2, but it can have an effect locally. So we must take that into account. But fortunately, we have regulations for that. And in Europe, regulations are pretty severe, pretty tight. So the impact is minimized, and we have no reason to believe that in Italy, where we place particular concern about our landscape, our environment, because they are so precious to us, I have no concern that it would be regulated in a way that it does not affect the environment at all. But it's still a concern that people have and it needs to be addressed. Actual impact on nuclear, on water in general.
I think there is a public perception here that nuclear energy in particular is uniquely sort of dependent on water resources. But as you just noted, right, any thermal power plant, right, that uses a steam cycle, right, is going to need ultimately a condenser that is going to need to eject that waste heat. You can never use 100% of the heat and convert it into useful work. Yet, what is this public perception that we're dominating that nuclear? Is it because the characteristic symbol that people think in their head of a nuclear power plant is those big hyperbolic cooling towers? Is that it? Or, you mentioned the potential here for using air cooling in addition to other technologies. What role do you think that newer technological solutions are going to have in dealing with both the perception and the challenges that we're having as global warming increases river temperatures in actually addressing these two issues?
I wanted to add just something on what she said because she mentioned the fact that nuclear power plants are not uniquely using water, right? So before you ask me about the Italian concerns about where to place the nuclear power plants, I have to mention that we do have several coal plants still active in Italy. They don't make up a huge part of our electricity mix, but we can't get rid of them because they provide a rotational reserve. And all of them are on the coastline. We have one in La Spezia, one in Civitavecchia, which is near Rome, one in the south in Brindisi, one in Sardinia in Sulcis, and one in the northeast in Monfalcone. Now, as I always say, you could just replace them with nuclear power. You would go from the dirtiest to the cleanest energy source, and you already know where to put them, because if the site is fit for a coal power plant, then it's probably is for a nuclear power plant. I mean, you already have the existing grid. You don't even need new connections. The problem is that those coal power plants are in the middle of cities, and you can't place a nuclear power plant in the middle of a city because regulation says that you shouldn't, except for the fact that nuclear power plants do not emit anything that kills people, while coal plants do. So they are emitting pollutants right in the middle of the city. So this is an interesting example of, I would say, cognitive dissonance of the people who don't realize that there is already an ongoing risk existing, and they are afraid of what it might actually be with the nuclear power plant. I will also add that eventually, if you really are out of options, there is another way of cooling a nuclear power plant, which is using subterranean water. Pump subterranean waters and use that to cool a nuclear power plant. It's more costly than other ways, but you can do it. And finally, the nuclear power does not consume water, it just uses it. But if you build a cooling tower, I want to mention that you don't send a lot more water into the atmosphere, taking it from basins, because when you allow water to turn into steam to vapor, it absorbs much more heat. So by using a cooling tower, you effectively diminish the intake of water by your reservoir, basin, whatever, by 97%. And that's also why, for example, China is building a big nuclear power plant next to the sea, like I think 6 or 10 reactors maybe. And they decided to use a cooling tower even if it's close to the sea, because the inlet from the sea and the outlet would be massive. So by using a massive cooling tower that they are building right now, they would reduce this intake of water by 97%. Small thing to add, like generally speaking, as we said, heat has an effect on the local environment, and we all want to try to minimize that. And for this reason, we should try to reuse as much as the heat as possible. So district heating is an option. Desalination is an option because you can do it with thermal processes. You can also do some carbon capture, like direct air CO2 capture with thermal processes. They will be doing it in Sizewell in the UK. Unfortunately, it's still an expensive process, so someone must pay for that. As a Sizewell will be a pilot project, and we'll see if it's sustainable. With different reactor types, you can also do higher grade heat that can be sold to chemical or industrial plant for their processes. It was mentioned yesterday that an American company will building new reactors that will operate at a higher temperature and sell the steam directly to an industrial factory for their internal usage. I do believe that, more broadly speaking, we still have a lot of usage of the products of nuclear power that we do not have seen yet. I pretty much think that we are with nuclear power where we were with the fossil fuels in the 1850s. Like, okay, fossil fuels have existed for 80 years by now. They had trains and maybe like the first steam-powered ships, but they were a long way from exploiting the full potential of fossil fuels. And I do think that we are at the same level with nuclear power right now.
You bring up a really important point, Luca, and I think this discussion is really about, the impact that we have on oceans and rivers. And most of that impact, actually, generally for a nuclear power plant, the largest interface that the plant has with the environment is through that cooling system through the oceans and rivers. But it's important, I think, we distinguish between waste heat or so-called waste heat and process heat or, energetic heat. And the basic problem is from basic physics, you can't ever extract 100% of the work out of a heat source that you're generating. So you have the heat coming out of the reactor. You just can't, by the second law of thermodynamics, get all of that and convert it into useful work. So we have to have some of it left over as waste heat. And I think, the question that we have here is things that are traditionally thought of as waste heat, which is what we generally have in that circulating water in the condenser. Is there going to be applications now for, say, district heating, especially with larger, say, industrial heat pumps that we can boost that up from 40 degrees Celsius, maybe up to 100 degrees Celsius with not that much energy input? What are we thinking about, given where we are, the reevaluation of the classical sort of dichotomy between waste and process heat or waste and work heat?
It would be a start to not prohibit it, because France has a long history of sabotaging its own nuclear power, and so there was a law, I'm not entirely sure it is being repealed, it might be still existing, that basically outlawed district heating with nuclear. So I know that most heating in France comes from nuclear to electrification, but not district heating. There is, I think, one nuclear power plant in France that supplies heat to a terrarium, like a big, reptile house that needs to be kept warmer. And that's about all the district heating that is done in a country that has one nuclear reactor per million people.
One of the things that I think that also we've been touching around here is the application for nuclear power. When we're talking about rivers and oceans, we're not just talking about its use for waste heat, but also the ability of nuclear energy to really make, say, the ocean water into drinkable, potable water, and the impact of nuclear power and its ability to do desalination. It's really amazing. I was on the very long bus ride back from Baraka, and I was just doing in my head the fact that a single reactor at Baraka, and not even all of its output, could desalinate all the water that's used in the United Arab Emirates in just a single reactor, and we obviously have 4 there. Just to give you an idea of the massive amount. In fact, we wouldn't even come close, we would use a lot of it, but we wouldn't use all of the power, of the electrical power that's coming out of that. And that's just through standard reverse osmosis. Historically, we've seen very limited applications of nuclear energy for desalination. Occupied by the Soviet Union, had the largest nuclear power desalination. Where do you think nuclear and desalination goes to? And I'm sure you're going to have something to add to this as well.
I will add very quickly onto that. I think there is a very good argument for using water desalination, possibly with nuclear power, also in terms of protection of biodiversity, in the sense that we need to expand our food production worldwide, because there are still some billions of people that do not have a nutritionally complete diet. And also the human population is still growing and will keep doing so for some decades at least. So we need to expand our food production, and with water desalination, we can do it maybe in deserts or in area with low biodiversity. If we don't do that, eventually agricultors will need to move where the water is and in the soil, and where the water is in the soil, it's normally where plants already grow, which means we will have to cut forests in order to grow food. And that's, of course, is not great for biodiversity, right? So there is a very good compelling argument actually for water desalination, also in terms of biodiversity protection. And of course, nuclear power, by providing the lowest carbon footprint of all possible energy sources, will also provide the lower carbon footprint for desalination.
And I saw a question over there, please.
I'm from Egypt, which is a developing country, and my question is, the climate change issues and solutions are costly. When we talk about desalination of seawater, it's nice to tackle these ideas, but actually in the countries where most of the problems lie, funds and money are very scarce. I would like to discuss what's your point of view, and getting funds for such projects is not easy. It's very challenging. People's awareness are still not within the average even knowledge of the issue. So what's your opinion about these challenges in the developing countries?
If you go to pretty much any other booth around here, they will explain you how the cost of renewables plummeted in the last 15 years, let's say, and now renewables that used to be expensive are very cheap and very convenient. Now, how did this happen? It's simple. Government poured dollars into the sector. They funded, they incentivized, they subsidized renewables for trillions of dollars, okay? And this allowed the technology to progress, to develop, and so the cost went down, the interest rates were down, because all governments showed that they were very serious about renewables, and so the interest rates were down, because you know that these are going to be built, right? So I think pretty pretty much the same needs to happen with nuclear power. Government need to invest. They need to show the investors that they are serious about nuclear power, that they will not like drop project midway as it happened like in Italy and in other countries as well. And if it happens, the technology will become cheaper. And this is also addresses the point, because which happens to me a lot, about why should we invest so much in nuclear power when most emissions will be coming from developing countries? And the answer is because we have a moral duty to bring the cost of this technology down so the developing countries will be able to afford them. And so the West need to invest in nuclear power also to help countries like Egypt adopt this technology, which, by the way, is happening because, as you surely know, Egypt is building a very big nuclear power plant in El Dabaa, like work started this year. And this plant will also have desalination. Will be the biggest desalination plant in the world once it's operational.
Do you want to talk a little bit more? Is there anything that we've missed?
I just want to bring up a nice case study that I know of, which is the case of the Turkey Point plant in Florida in the United States. So in 1975, the United States crocodile was almost extinct, was declared endangered by the UN. And until 2 years later, they found a nest of crocodiles near the discharge system of the Turkey Point nuclear power plant, because crocodiles, first of all, crocodiles are cold-blooded animals, so they need warmer waters. And also, the area of the bay where it was normally very polluted, but in that spot it was not, because the water discharge for a nuclear power plant is totally clean. So when they discovered that, they created a reserve, like they created a system of channels, a sort of an artificial lagoon reservoir where crocodiles are nesting. And in 2007, the US crocodile, the North American crocodile, was removed from the list of endangered species. So this is actually, I think, is a pretty good note on which to close the panel about nuclear power and water.
Thank you, everyone, for coming, and thank you for our amazing panelists, and thank you for attending.